even if it's true, that they would not like to hear if they were to hear you to have said that. Whether it's about somebody's weight or somebody's, whatever factual comment you might make. Scholars have generally defined very broadly that backbiting is saying something about somebody, even if true, that they would not like to be said about them. Slander obviously is saying something about somebody that is not true. And there is an element of intent where you do it intentionally to compromise somebody's integrity or image, and that's where slander comes in, when you deliberately try to destroy somebody's reputation. So the reason why I referenced that definition is because that is one of the first dangers of, from a very terrestrial perspective, like a worldly perspective, is that you begin to damage people's reputation. The more and more you start talking about somebody in a way that's not healthy or positive, the more and more that individual's reputation will be impacted. You hurt people's reputation, number one. Number two, it actually begins, the more we do it, the more it creates an environment of distrust. It becomes very difficult to have meaningful conversations with individuals if you have in the back of your mind a certain perception that you've heard from many other people. So, we start putting up psychological barriers in our ability to effectively communicate with somebody else. You have to look no further than the current political environment with the general elections coming up to realize about how much bantering and, not only backbiting, but slandering that's happening, between predominantly the two parties, between Trump and Clinton. And, what kind of meaningful, honest conversations do many Americans on either side of the aisle have? I think it becomes very difficult to do so, where people become so entrenched in their opinion of the other person's reputation that they're unwilling to hear something good about them. But that is also a very serious issue within the Muslim community, and even within Muslim organizations, where you might find a scenario where I apologize, where people are being allowed to say things about other people and go unchecked, right? That's where our responsibility comes in. But one of the things, and by the way, by way of a brief reference, because it's relevant, or else I wouldn't. My career, professionally, I'm an HR executive. I work specifically in the healthcare industry. The reason why I reference that is when people at work, and I have to start, taking care of some of these issues, start backbiting against each other. Not only does it create a culture of distrust within the organization, it actually creates a perception of distrust for the individual who engages in backbiting. And why do I say that? Because if you're constantly in my office complaining about Jane, and then you complain about Bob, then you complain about Abdullah, then you complain about Steve, immediately I begin to start thinking that what do you say about me when you're talking to somebody else? That if you're very comfortable speaking in very, especially in negative terms about somebody, I'm not sure I'm going to trust you a lot, let alone the whole culture, creating a culture of distrust. I'm not sure I'm going to trust you as an individual that much. And that becomes one of the dangers of backbiting and slandering, is that you actually compromise your own integrity and your own ability to be trusted by those around you. And so, those are, kind of in a very generic buckets, kind of the four major categories within which I think that, backbiting can be dangerous to individuals, both the person being backbited against, as well as the individual doing the backbiting, and then also the communal impact that backbiting and slander can have. Let's move then to maybe what might hopefully be a little bit more motivational for us to contemplate seizing and desisting our backbiting, if we are even engaged in that. And that's the metaphysical consequences, or the metaphysical dangers. The program references in modern times. That in modern times we've maybe forgotten about the dangers of backbiting. I think one of the most dangerous elements of the modern reality that we live in is that we actually have begun to forget a lot about the akhirah, the reality, the truth, the fact that, Yawm al-Qiyamah, al-Haq, it is the truth. Because when you think about the textbook definition of secularism, the modern environment within which a lot of us, not a lot of us, all of us live in and are impacted by, I think there's verses in the Quran that aptly define secularism. تحبون العاجلة وتذرون الآخرة, which means that you have love, you have concern, you have commitment, you have dedication, all of it. You have that hubb, you have that love for this dunya. But that's not only secularism. Secularism also is the second part of that equation, or that second verse that precedes this one, وَتَذَرُونَ الْآخِرَةِ. And that doesn't mean that you deny the hereafter. That doesn't mean that you reject the hereafter. That means more that you're averse to the notion of the akhirah, that you do not really like the concept of the akhirah in your core, that it's something that actually, the reality of which you are not fully embracing or liking the concept, and so you begin to dismiss it and you begin to remove it from contemplation and consideration as you live your life. And that, I think, is probably one of the most dangerous elements of modernity, is that I believe that the modern world and the Muslim community living in the modern world are becoming less and less considerate, impacted, influenced, motivated, scared, concerned about the akhirah, the fact that there is a day of judgment. So when it comes to the notion of backbiting, when elements of backbiting came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what he would do, as he has stated in a couple of ahadith, أو كما قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, is that if you hear something negative about a Muslim or any human being for that matter, but specifically in this in this situation about Muslim, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, make excuses for your brothers, even if it were 70. So you got to make 70 plus excuses for your brothers and sisters if you see them or hear something about them that's less than positive. And this is a higher calling. This is what Allah and His Messenger asks of all of us as believers in Allah and His Messenger and Yawm al-Qiyamah, is that we have to up the level of our game. We have to establish a standard. We have to establish a mode of being and living that is above and beyond what society that's around us may live the way they live, or even what they expect, right? The analogy I always like to reference, and I apologize about a basketball reference or sports references, but let's say you're playing in your local community masjid's basketball gym. You're playing basketball with a group of guys, and you're some hot stuff. You play really, really well, and as you're playing really well, you're dominating the game. Anybody from the NBA that pick a name. I won't even have to pick some of the the best players, but you take I'm a Minnesota guy, so you take Andrew Wiggins, steps onto the court. No matter how good you think you are, there is a recognition that the game that Andrew Wiggins is bringing to that local masjid is much better. It's at a different level, right? That's one of the sunnahs of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we forget, is that the people of Mecca, they were known for generosity, maruwa. It was a known, a quality of the Arab in Mecca. Right? They were known to be generous. They were known to be giving, caring, sacrificial. Right? Some of the most powerful people in the Arabian clans were amongst the poorest, and that was a sign of their nobility, because they would, whatever wealth they would have, they would give it whether it was to Hajjaj or whether it was to the poor. That was a quality that they had. But enter the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam into that game, and he just takes it to the next level, where people who were known to be generous were saying, "I thought I was generous." Prophet Muhammad, well, whether they're Muslim or not, but they say Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now that's generosity, right? When you think about the battle oh subhanallah, I'm forgetting the battle. It was the very last one where we got all of this huge victory with Ta'if, Khaybar, and we got this huge victory. All of this wealth was collected through that battle. And the Prophet ﷺ just started giving it to non-Muslims, مُؤَلَّفَةَ قُلُوبُهُمْ, right? To soften their hearts to Islam. And people, who were the beneficiaries of that generosity, would go to their people and say, "You have to accept this deen, because that is a man who is not afraid of poverty. He is generous. He's from amongst the most generous people." So that is where, in referencing back to backbiting, we need to establish a standard for ourselves that elevates us amongst the people that we interface with, so people look at us and say, that is a beautiful way of living. That's a character that I can aspire and be inspired by. And that's that higher calling that we truly get once we understand the truth and the reality of Yawm al-Qiyamah. I had referenced that sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to believers, say ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ijtanibu kathiran min adh-dhann inna ba'da adh-dhanni ithm, right? As it relates to backbiting, Allah talks specifically to the believers. But in this verse, I'm going to reference an ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically references all of humanity. Ya ayyuhan nas ma gharraka bi rabbika al-kareem. What is it that makes you heedless or forgetful or disregarding of your Lord, the most generous? Rabbika al-Kareem, the most generous of Lords. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kind of continues those verses by explaining some of the basic gifts that He has given us that we take for granted. بِرَبِّكَ الْكَرِيمِ الَّذِي خَلَقَكَ فَسَوَّاكَ فَعَدَلَكَ فِي أَيِّ صُورَةٍ مَا شَاءَ رَكَّبَكَ. Right, the one who created you, the one who gave you your beautiful form and gave you all of these gifts. Why is it that we now have ghurur, or heedlessness, or forgetfulness of doing what we know we're supposed to do, especially in the situation of backbiting? Why do we allow people on our Facebook pages or in our meetings or in our conversations with each other, whether we're having hanging out at night somewhere or studying in the day, and somebody comes up that we don't like, we start talking bad about them, or we start talking about them behind their backs, right? Why do we just end up engaging in that? Because we end up having ghurur. And why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say we have ghurur? Allah answers His own question for us, for our edification, for our knowledge. And that is, كَلَّا بَلْ تُكَذِّبُونَ بِالدِّينِ. Because verily you have تُكَذِّب, كَذِب, and is really, you'd think about it as lying, but in this case it's denying. كَلَّا بَلْ تُكَذِّبُونَ بِالدِّينِ. You have really denied the truth of the day of judgment, or the day of, obviously, deen meaning religion in terms of the closest translation, but specifically referencing the day of judgment. Right? كَلَّا بَلْ تُكَذِّبُونَ بِالدِّينِ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings a more eminent reality. Not only is it that you might deny the day of judgment, كَلَّا بَلْ تُكَذِّبُونَ بِالدِّينِ and إِنَّا عَلَيْكُمْ لَحَافِظِينَ كِرَامًا كَاتِبِينَ, that upon you, verily upon you, at this very moment, are those who preserve, are the hafidhin. And in this situation, it's referencing, according to most scholars and mufassirin that I've either learned from or I've read, is obviously referencing our angels on our shoulders. Kiraman, again, you see this beautiful reference to kirama, right? That these angels that are noting everything, they're writing everything down, they're preserving everything that we do, but they're noble in their preservation. They're noble in their kitaba of everything that we do, right? So as they're writing with nobility. They're writing with this kirama because of who they are and of the task that is with them. And once we begin to forget this on a regular routine basis, we allow ourselves to be caught up into whether it's backbiting or anything else. And another thing that I think also is dangerous about backbiting is that we become afraid about our own image. That if we tell somebody, look, brother, look, sister, I really don't want to get involved with this, or it's not a good thing to do, we're afraid that people might look at us badly, that, I don't even know what the modern, insult is for people who actually do good work, whether you're a snot, whether you're, see, I shouldn't even come up with names because I'm going to age myself. But we become afraid about what other people might think of us as good people, right? So we're in a modern society, in a modern environment where the more sin that we commit, the cooler we are, and the more integrity that we have, the more good that we do, the more odd we seem. And that's one of the dangers of modernity and modern society, where rather than protecting ourselves and the sins and the mistakes that we might make, we flaunt them proudly over social media with our friends. And a'udhu billah, inshallah, we protect ourselves from this. So it's this sense of taqwa that drives us, this higher calling that drives us to do what is right, to stop ourselves from committing these mistakes that we find ourselves committing once in a while, right? Because avoiding sin is what many of our scholars have used to define this whole notion of taqwa. That it's sometimes it's ascribed to Hadrat Ali, sometimes to Umar radiallahu anhuma. But when they were asked about taqwa, stated that you walk through a path of thorns. You lift your jilbab, your clothes, and you walk very slowly and carefully, so that those thorns don't hurt you and they don't get caught up in your clothes. That you're very careful, methodical, and thoughtful about how you cross that path. And so this path of life that we're experiencing, taqwa is to walk through that life very carefully, very thoughtfully, to not allow these thorns to prick us, to allow these sins to prick us. Because on the day of judgment, if you harm any other human being, what ends up happening is on the day of judgment, when all judgment before all judgment is final with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that people who you harmed will come to you and will plead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that so and so harmed me. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow that individual who was harmed to take your good deeds. When I say you, I don't obviously mean anybody specifically here, but it's just something that we should try to personalize. That the individual's good deeds will be taken who harmed somebody else. And there will be scenarios where all of their good deeds will be taken to recompense for the harm that was done. And backbiting against somebody, slandering against somebody, falls within that bucket. It's not just hitting, punching, stealing. It's also backbiting. It's one of those dangers that we have to remember, is that on the day of judgment, if anybody backbites against somebody else, that person will come to that individual and file a complaint with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and will be able to take their good deeds. And if that doesn't suffice, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow the plaintiff to give all of their bad deeds to that individual who did something against them. These things are very, very dangerous, brothers and sisters. And obviously I speak to myself as well, because this is something we cannot forget. And it is our forgetting of the reality of the Day of Judgment that can allow us to become more cavalier about these sins. And we have to be very, very careful. And I just want to take a quick look at time and be thoughtful about the commitment that I made. I'm down to about 5 minutes. I do want to make sure that if anybody has any questions through the chat process, that we'll try to engage that. So I will, kind of leave with one last kind of comment around the dangers of, or two comments around the dangers of backbiting. And one is to close out this comment, this concept about how we find ourselves committing errors that we know we're not supposed to do. Nobody on this webinar is ignorant to the fact. I have confidence that backbiting is wrong. We just have to be very thoughtful about the stuff that we engage ourselves in. That it actually has a strong probability to be backbiting, but we've ignored that reality because either we're in the social media space or we're trying to be, friendly or try to fit in with a group of people. And sometimes more dangerously, we actually think that it's allowed in a particular situation. Now, there are allowances to talk about somebody truthfully when they are not there. That's not the purpose of this particular webinar, but real quickly, people in leadership for wedding proposals and there's a third one. I'm forgetting. Maybe somebody can put that in the chat what the third one is so the group can remember. But there are exceptions to talk about somebody when it's beneficial for broader society. But let's err on the side of caution than err on the side that, oh, this fits within this bucket, so it's okay for me to talk about somebody else. But this notion of the akhirah is the number one quality that we as people of taqwa need to have, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah, reminds us, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Right? So in this book there is no doubt, and it is guidance. There's huda in this book for those who have taqwa. And the very first quality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about for those who have taqwa, الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, those who believe in the unseen, those who believe in the realities that we have kiraman katibin. We have these noble recorders on our shoulders who are preserving everything that we do. And when we engage in backbiting or slander. And one of the most, amazing things to me about this whole notion of backbiting and slander and other elements that fall within that bucket, and those are the dangers of our words about what we say. That the Prophet ﷺ was reported to have said that the son of Adam will fall, into layers and layers of hell because not knowing about the dangers of their word. Something that they said would make them fall, into the depths of the hellfire. وَلَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all from such a state. But on the flip side, some of the most beautiful things, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes paradise, he describes it in ways that, obviously people get excited about, and they're like, this is something I long for, and talks about how beautiful it is, and it's something you have never seen or you can imagine, and everything that you want, you will have. But one of the qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in Jannah is that there will be no lahu, there will be no idle talk, there will be nothing of speech that does any damage to anybody. That is one of the qualities of paradise, because we all know, recognize, and have experienced the pain and suffering that our words can cause. Right? We can cause such pain and suffering to each other by what we say, by simple words, and people just, the agony that you can experience through people's words, idle talk and heedless comments can be very, very hurtful and painful. But Jannah is without pain. Jannah is without any agony or without any remorse, without any any hurt. And as a result of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removes lahu from paradise, so that there can be no possibility for any human being to say something that can hurt you, because there will be no pain in paradise. And the fact that our words, and backbiting being amongst them, is part of that category, indicates the dangers of backbiting. And so with that, I'll stop and see if there's any questions or comments that anybody might have from who's on this webinar. and I'll give it, maybe 30 seconds to a minute. And if I don't see any comments in the chats, inshallah, what we'll do is we'll just close with a dua, and we'll let you get on with your Sunday afternoon. And inshallah, in 2 weeks, we'll have another Mina webinar. All right, it looks like a couple of people are typing. Sister Yasmin, absolutely right. She wrote a comment in the chat. I'm sure all of you can read it. That giving people the benefit of the doubt can be very, very powerful, and not only can be, is and should be. And this is actually a good habit to get into. So, I did reference that hadith and probably didn't spend enough time on it. So, Jazakallah khair for bringing that beautiful hadith back about this higher calling, about how we behave. That when we do hear something about a brother or sister that's not positive, we should deliberately get into this habit of, finding excuses for them. And one of the things that I've actually tried to get a couple of people to do, which is very difficult, this is on the far extreme of how difficult it can be, is that think about something wrong that even the likes of Donald Trump has done and said on his campaign trail. Although not a Muslim brother, he is a brother in humanity. So let me stretch this hadith a little bit and challenge all of us just to get into this practice about giving people the benefit of the doubt, so that we can make it our muscle memory, right? That we can naturally just make excuses. See if you can come up with at least, let's keep it simple, 3 excuses for Donald Trump. That's your homework for today. Turn on the TV, see what ridiculous things he said today, and then try to find 3 excuses for him. All right, so Jazakallah khair, Sister Yasmin. All right, Brother Ala has or Sister Ala has a comment. You may have touched on it and I just missed it, but how can we differentiate between when people come to us for advice on a situation versus backbiting? Venting, unfortunately, oftentimes feels like backbiting, but how can you ensure you don't push someone away when they're in need of actually discussing a problem? This is where it gets tricky, right? So somebody comes to you and saying, I'm having this really hard time with this brother or sister in this on this committee. They don't listen, they don't show up, they're late. Again, I've been there in those sort of situations. And very honestly, the first thing that I always advise people, not only in Muslim organization work that I do, but in my capacity at work, is the first thing I always do is tell that individual to talk to that other person, to actually have, and sometimes it can be difficult. I don't want to oversimplify this, but the best thing to do is actually have a conversation with that individual. Whatever somebody's coming to you for advice, especially if it falls outside of those 3 categories where it's okay to provide advice, and like specifically around marriage and other such things, that try to actually go have that, or encourage that individual to first have that conversation with the person who they have a grievance against. That we try to develop that skill set and that level of maturity where we have it directly with them, because now it's no longer backbiting. Real quickly, I'm sure I missed it in my notes, but one of the things that is important to know about backbiting is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives examples and analogies of things all the time in the Quran. And I know we all know this, but we really need to kind of reflect on it just for a couple of 30 seconds, and inshallah we will close. Is that in that verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when referencing somebody that's backbiting, does ask the question, أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ, right? It's that, do you actually love to eat the flesh of your brother, right? It's the example that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to kind of talk about how disgusting of an act this is. It's as if you are eating the flesh of your brother. Meta, not only a brother, but a dead brother. Because I think one of the references, and I haven't validated it, so this is just my opinion. So please, every time I have a scholarly reference, I'll reference that. This one I do not. But one of the things that when I was reading this verse in preparation for this, that I realized is sometimes that maybe Allah references a dead corpse, right? A corpse that's always dead. Of a brother is because when you backbite, you're actually killing their reputation. Because you're killing their reputation, it's not only that you're eating their flesh, you've actually killed them, and now you're eating their flesh. And that's something that I think we, also regarding, the diseases and the dangers of backbiting, something we should be contemplative of. And when you have a conversation directly with the person you have grievances against, inshallah, we obviously have to have some skill sets to do that. You take that backbiting element away, and you actually have productive, wholesome conversations about how to work well together. So inshallah, in terms of your question, Ala, hopefully that helps as an initial advice. And obviously I encourage you to talk to other learned people in your community to get maybe a little bit more advice. And with that, we're a little bit past our time. For which I apologize. If you had any other commitments, we will close with a dua. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر جزاكم الله خيرا السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.